Hello, everybody. Welcome back to this week's TechNest. We have Dr. Brian Dixon with us, and we are so excited to get this chance to interview him today and get his thoughts on so many different topics. I mean, we're going to talk about mental health, teletherapy, being an entrepreneur of color, being a psychiatrist of color, and then also juggling social media and mental health, and then all of these different entrepreneurial places that Dr. Dixon has a hand in. It is going to be a fascinating, fast-paced day, lots of questions, lots of insights. So Dr. Dixon, if you would you just give us a quick overview of your background and your career path, and then we'll launch into it.
Yeah, so thank you all so much, Devin, Bruce, and TechFW for having me. So I'm from East Texas, Lufkin, Texas, a small town that nobody's ever heard of. Grew up there, went to Baylor for undergrad, went to Texas A&M for medical school, and then the University of Kentucky for residency, where I did a combined residency in adult psychiatry, pediatrics, and child psychiatry. Moved back to Texas because Kentucky has a really horrible queso, and y'all should never have queso up there. Moved back to Texas, worked at a couple different places until I came to Fort Worth. And then I realized I got the entrepreneurial bug and started my private practice about 6 going on 7 years ago. And then I've just been building ever since. So yeah, so I'm super glad to be here, and I can't wait to talk about whatever y'all want to talk about.
Wonderful. Okay, so the first place I kind of want to dive into is, it's been a year in the pandemic. You have tons of interviews out there of the first couple months of the pandemic and how that has affected mental health and your advice there. So I want to talk about, being a year in, the mental health that's happening right now. Mm-hmm. So my first question is, from your own practice, how has your advice and your counseling changed from pre-pandemic to beginning of the pandemic to the counseling that you offer right now for stress and mental health?
Yeah, so before we ever started the pandemic, mental health has always been, for us, we were full before the pandemic ever came along. So, I mean, we had wait lists of people who were trying to get in to see us. And it's basically continued ever since. So we've just been running on all cylinders, 100% that whole entire time. We didn't really change our strategies because good mental health is kind of timeless. And so we really work to empower people and then to ground people in the experience. So one of the issues with the pandemic was that nobody really knew what was going on. And that's the absolute worst thing. It's very much like the stock market, right? So the stock market gets all in a tizzy when there's no certainty. And the exact same thing happened with the pandemic. And so we work really hard to just ground people in. Here's what we know. Here's what we don't know. You're going to be okay. Wear a mask, wash your hands. Like, I had to go back to just being a regular doctor rather than a psychiatrist. So to just reassure people that we were going to get through it. So that's, and then now that we're kind of on the vaccine end of things, it's still the same stuff, which is make sure you wash your hands and eat right and exercise and talk to your family and see your therapist. And, that it's just very structured.
Yeah. And then kind of a trend question looking forward, with people getting back to, the normally scheduled program of life, have there been any stressors or anxieties that you have seen come up of trying to get back to, what was normal? So yeah, any trends in that?
Yeah, so that's one of the elephants in the room because there is no normal. And so anytime something happens, let's not even talk pandemic, let's just talk kind of general mental health. Anytime something happens that fundamentally changes your understanding of how the world works, you need to really classify that as a trauma, and you need to mourn the loss of what you had before in order to appreciate wherever you're going. And we collectively, as a nation, as a global society, we've been through a trauma. We're kind of coming out the other end, but we can't go back to where we were because now we know better. We know that there are people who are over 500 and something thousand people are now dead because of this virus. So we can't go back to there. And if we don't appropriately kind of mourn that loss, we're in for a world of hurt, because if trauma begets trauma, begets trauma, begets trauma. So if you don't address the trauma now, we will have hell to pay come later on. And that's not me trying to be sensational. It's just that's how trauma works. So I'm really hoping that we get on the good foot now and do what we need to do now, so that that doesn't continue to haunt us.
Yeah, and when it comes to getting on the good foot, as you just said, the whole world has experienced this trauma. People that just started kindergarten, their first couple of years of schooling are going to look drastically different than the future, all the way up to, people in retirement homes. Like, their whole world has shifted. So what do you think is like the right age to start talking about overcoming that trauma? And, is anybody too old or too young to be talking about that?
Yeah, so there is no age differentiator for good mental health. So my youngest patient is 3, my oldest is 70 something, and I think that we should be processing and dealing with mental health that whole entire time, and especially in a time such as this. So you're right. I've encountered seniors in high school who didn't have a senior year, and it's like profound, or college students over at TCU that didn't get to walk the stage, right? And these are major rite of passage milestones that we cherish as a society, and now they're no longer there. And everybody's trauma is different, and so nobody's trauma is any better or worse than anybody else's trauma. But it's all important, and that's why I say everybody should have a therapist. And we're probably short 500,000 therapists in the grand scheme of things for the onslaught that's coming.
Yeah. And then kind of one other thought that I want to make on this point, and I want your advice and your thoughts on before we move on to another category. But, what is, because I know there's a trend that mental health is becoming something you could talk about in the workplace, and something that is being offered on insurance and something like that. So what, as entrepreneurs and as employees, as employers, how do we make mental health something that we can, or should we even talk about it in the workplace? Does that create a healthier workplace? Or, with everybody talking about, oh, I need a mental health day, does that positively contribute? Does it negatively contribute? What are your thoughts in the professional?
Yeah, it's a great question. I always say lead by example, right? So when the head of companies and corporations are taking care of their mental health, it will show not only in their work, it's also going to show if you talk about it during staff meeting and retreats and that sort of thing. And so I am a huge proponent of that, because that power differential is really important. And people, especially in our society, people listen to the people who are in charge. And so I say to all entrepreneurs, absolutely talk about it. I was blessed because as a psychiatrist, I actually went through therapy as part of my training. And so I got a better appreciation of what it is. And then I've had 3 therapists throughout my life, and 5, including couples therapists, because I'm not easy to live with. So so it's one of those things where we need to talk about it. Once everybody has a therapist, then there is no more stigma, because everybody's doing it. And so I know it sounds facetious to say everybody should have a therapist, but I think that that's the best way to defeat stigma, so that it doesn't continue to haunt us.
Yeah. And I was looking at, I believe it was a Star Telegram interview with you, and they put out a report with it. But something that stuck out to me that I'd like you to, expand on a bit is, it said, good mental health is not the absence of mental health struggles. Coping skills help reduce stress and promote a good mental health. It stated that you are an advocate, as you said, for everybody having, a therapist. So for those people that haven't necessarily made the jump yet to go out and get a therapist, what is your top of the line advice for finding that? And what are some of those easy entry questions, that they can expect going into it?
Yeah, so I jokingly say this, but it's also 100% true, which is number one, you are a terrible therapist for yourself because you're too close to yourself to be objective. And so, yeah, so that's where therapists are really, really helpful because they can see patterns of behavior or thoughts that you can't see by the nature of how the process works. Finding a therapist is really difficult, but that's one of the reasons why I'm entering the software space with a new app that is called Guide, and we'll talk about that later. And then when you finally do see a therapist, the key is find someone that really matches with you. Take the opportunity to bare your soul. The way that therapists work, and there are lots of different therapists out there with lots of different degrees. So you can have an MD, a DO, a PsyD, a PhD, an LCSW, LMFT, LPC. All of these people are trained to number one, keep your confidentiality. So the rules about confidentiality are strict. And when I say strict, they are strict. And if you violate those things, you can lose your license. And so you can be open and honest in therapy. The goal is to, yeah, if you get a good vibe, stick with it. If you don't get a good vibe, it's not that therapy isn't good for you. It means that maybe that therapist or that particular approach doesn't work for you. And so that's where you have to kind of look around and shop around and see if you can find the best fit.
Well, wonderful. And I think that's a perfect segue into the next kind of topic that I want to talk about, which is the telehealth industry that has been booming and the, increase of apps that can help and all of that. So before we jump into questions, could you kind of give us a scope of what telehealth looks like now? What apps are available? What are you working on?
Yeah, so telehealth is huge. So before the pandemic, there were some people in that space, and quite a few of them were more telemedicine based. So telemedicine meaning you would get online and you would see either an internal medicine doctor or a family medicine doctor or that sort of thing. And there were a few telecounseling type apps. Well, since the pandemic, obviously things have exploded. I was one of those doctors where I said, I will absolutely not be offering virtual appointments because I wasn't trained that way and I like in person. And now I have switched. I still prefer in person, but I recognize that virtual appointments are here to stay. And they're actually very helpful for quite a few of the folks that I've seen. And so when it comes to different platforms, there's, BetterHelp, there's, I think Therapy Space or Talk Therapy, it's a talk space. I think that's text based. But the key is just keep in mind you need to use the one that you feel most comfortable with. And so I'm going to resist the temptation to say that one is better or worse than anything else. All of the therapists on platforms like BetterHelp, they're legitimate therapists that have licenses. Many of them even have private practices. They just spend some time under contract with those particular companies. So you're still getting good therapy. It's just basically how you want to pay for it and how you want to access it. And so with my particular app, it's actually not therapy. It's not teletherapy based. It's actually more a support app for therapists, because the problem is therapists are getting burned out from everything else. And so between that company and the other company that I co-founded with Reston, our goal is to actually support the therapists. So support the people who are doing the work that is going to be needed for the next 10 to 15 years.
Gotcha. And I know from, your end of it, the hesitancy at first to go to the teletherapy appointments. Has there been science to prove, that the in-person ones are better, or, do people need to hold out for those, or is it really important to get those virtual ones set up?
Oh, Devin, you're about to cause a war. So
I know we're challenging assumptions today.
I know. I love it. Yeah. So challenging assumptions indeed. So it depends on who you ask. So obviously the platforms, the people who are creating the hybrid platforms, they have papers that show that telemedicine and teletherapy is just as effective, if not better, for certain populations. And I've seen that to be the case. There are certain millennials and younger folks who are very comfortable talking to a computer. And of course, they are going to enjoy that particular particular modality. But there are just as many folks who say, absolutely. And they have told me this, my patients, and they say, yeah, I don't like doing this over the computer thing. I want to come in person. You wear a mask, I wear a mask. And I think that luckily the field, or not luckily, sadly, the field is so underdeveloped as a sector that the opportunities abound. And so I often say this, in the medical world, in the health services world, the medical side is very overdeveloped. Surgical services, anesthesia, radiology, you have big hospitals to cardiac care and orthopedics, but you don't see that in mental health. We are an undeveloped sector, and it's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about building out our sector so that we can not only prove that we're important, but more importantly, we can bring more people into the field.
Okay, so kind of comes down to preference on those seeking, sounds
Correct.
like.
Yes, correct. So so do what you're comfortable with. Most of the, once you get to a therapist, they can help you determine where your best fit is. So for example, if you see, if you search on psychology today and you pull up a therapist and you call them and you do a screening interview, because most therapists will do some form of a screening interview, either 5 to 10 or 15 minutes, to make sure that you're a good fit for them and they're a good fit for you. If for some reason that doesn't work, then they will help you find someone else, because generally therapists know other therapists and they know the different modalities and what other therapists are doing. And so I think that's where it's really helpful to just pick up the phone and call somebody, because somebody knows somebody. So yes, and then with the virtual options, again, just try it. You're not out of anything other than maybe a little bit of time or a little bit of money, but it gives you access to the overall system, and they can help you learn to maneuver the system until we can do a better job of getting ourselves organized.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you. I know that was one of those challenging questions. So we have a couple more of those today, so I'll just sprinkle them throughout. But let's see. Next question is, right now you have a room full of entrepreneurs and you are one yourself. So we've talked about the trends in mental health for people coming out of the pandemic, but have you seen any specific stressors and anxieties specific to the entrepreneurial community? And do you have any advice surrounding just for them?
Yeah, so entrepreneurs are a unique breed of people because we are big dreamers, right? We think that all things are possible, and I love it. We're also, most times, are not the integratory people. So we're not the detail-oriented folks, and we tend to take failure or shortcomings very personally. And so even before the pandemic, myself as an entrepreneur, working with other entrepreneurs, I'm like, oh my gosh, we're kind of a mess. And the good part is when I started reaching out for coaching, so therapy is different than coaching. There is some overlap. But I would say to everybody coming out of this pandemic, for an entrepreneur, you need to do both. You need to have a therapist to help you work on kind of internal hiccups and paradigms and old traumas. And then you need to have a coach, because at the end of the day, there are certain trends and things that you just don't know. And having someone help lead you through that is super helpful. And so, yeah, I have lots of coaches through EO and other organizations. And then I have my therapist. And between those two things, I can stay sane and keep up with all the things I have going on.
So, and then my second question to that is, have you seen anything specific to, entrepreneurs of color, something to add on to that they also need to be looking at?
Yeah, so this is where for Black entrepreneurs, y'all, it's been exhausting. It has been absolutely exhausting. So for example, there was yet another shooting up in Minneapolis day before yesterday. I can't even remember because it's right. And so I can't give my full attention to, seeing patients, which is how I make money, or building companies, which is, my dream, because I'm either seeing, racism rear its head that way, or rear its head through the voting laws that are going through the legislature. And so as a result, I can't give my undivided attention. And so as Black entrepreneurs, that's what they go through all the time. And I'm lucky because my profit margin is way bigger than most Black entrepreneurs, right? So if you're selling cupcakes, if you are doing certain types of services where it's very time intensive and very personnel intensive or very supply intensive, the result is they have to literally ignore speaking up. They have to ignore the civic side of things in order to make payroll, and that just eats at your soul. So I'm lucky to have a really good team. I have a great team for each of the companies that I'm part of. But yeah, I'm tired, and that's not even including the fact that Black companies don't get loans at the same rates of other companies. That's not including the fact that venture capital investment in Black companies is like 1% or something insanely low. Like we have all of these hurdles that we have to jump as Black entrepreneurs. It's a wonder that any of them even try. But I think that's the testament of the entrepreneurial spirit, because they still believe, and I still believe, that this country is worth fighting for, it's worth building, it's worth growing, it's worth inspiring the next generation. So we're going to keep doing it. But if you see a Black entrepreneur, just tell them, hey, I see you, and take a break if you can, and we will support you in any way that we can. So that's my 2 cents on that particular topic.
No, and thank you for being open about that. I appreciate that. I know that can also be a difficult question. And, you mentioned social media and how we continue to just, get an inflow of, there are positives, but that is our news source, so I want to jump into a couple questions about social media and mental health. And so with that first one, do you, in your professional, therapy coaching, or not coaching, in your professional therapy sessions, do you talk about social media and setting boundaries with it as, the news source, but also a connection source? What do you advise about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So social media and just any electronic use, period, but social media is particularly damaging because of the reward cycle. So anytime you are playing a video game, anytime you're on social media, you get these small bursts of dopamine with certain things, and it can be positive or negative. So it could be, if I feel really strongly that somebody's wrong and I see a post that is cancel culturing that person, and I'm like, yeah, right, that's a release of dopamine. Or vice versa, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I just watched Rock the Block and the other night, and I was like, oh my god, these houses are gorgeous and I love it, and that releases dopamine. So it can go either way, but the point is, if you're not aware that that's what's happening, then you get sucked in, and as you are your brain is releasing more and more dopamine, at some point you're going to get fatigued. And so I tell people all the time, I don't care if it's doom scrolling or happy scrolling, you need to limit the amount of time that you are creating these dopamine surges. And the difficult part is, and this is where I kind of feel a little bit hypocritical, because as a entrepreneur, as a business owner, and I'm sure Lauren can totally speak to this, which is that is our job, and when we're doing marketing, we choose the things that release the most amount of dopamine, because that's how you get eyeballs, and eyeballs equals clicks, and clicks equals sales, and blah, blah, blah. So I feel a bit conflicted about it, but what I try to do as an entrepreneur is do positive things that should not trap people in a spiral of them being online all the time. But yes, absolutely. In my office, I tell every kid, every adult, limit the amount of time that you're on social media. And then some platforms are just horrible. So I tell them, if you can, just stay off of them altogether, because they create a false sense of what the world is. So Instagram is gorgeous for pictures, but at the end of the day, nobody looks like that, and sunsets don't always look like that. And, there's gray days and not always sunshine and lollipops, right? So be very, very careful with how much you expose yourself to that stuff.
Yeah. And one of the things that I've seen as a millennial, is this huge trend and this huge career that is being an influencer, and so I have one question specific to this that I think just people my age, it's of interest, So with these influencers, we've seen a lot of it through the pandemic is they're starting to break down these perfect lives that they've built on their platforms of how they're making money, but on their platforms, they're breaking it down from, hey guys, this isn't my real life. Here's me crying. Here's my hard day. And so there's been a huge inflow of us seeing people that we follow being really sad and being really honest and having a really difficult day. Do you have any thoughts on that of just, now there's an inflow of seeing even more sadness, and we have these attachments to these people that we follow. We want them to be doing well. And we know that we know that Instagram and TikTok, they aren't real, but it's complicated for people our age. And yeah, any insights on that?
Yeah, super complicated. So this is a completely personal opinion. This is not my professional opinion, nor do I know that there's any research or papers about this, but it's almost like performative therapy. And I'm not a huge fan of that because number one, therapy is hard. It's really freaking hard, which is why most people don't do it. You have to go in and bare your soul and see all the awful shit that you may think or see, or things that have been done to you. And then you have to process through that. That is super hard. And so I don't know that you can get a true, authentic experience by doing that with the camera in front of you, right? Because you don't, to me, the power of therapy is, again, there's somebody either virtually or in person giving you immediate feedback, giving you immediate support, validation, and or confrontation, right? And if you're just kind of talking into a video blog, I'm not sure that to me that doesn't count. And so yeah, I'm not a huge fan of that. I think it creates more trouble than it's worth. Like one of the things that is not really tied to this, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's kind of like the online reviews. And so, oh, I'm going to go see this therapist. Let me check their reviews. And I tell people all the time, a 5-star therapist may not be the therapist for you because number one, their style may not be your style. It may be that the work is really hard. And so it may be that you get there and that therapist is really a hard ass and tells you, get your act together, and you don't like it. And so you leave a 1-star, right? And so it doesn't mean that the 1-star therapist is bad. It doesn't mean that the 5-star therapist is good. All of these things, this is one of those places. So the influencers, online reviews, this is where I would say, yeah, don't trust any tech part of that part. Because at the end of the day, it's the relationship between you and your therapist, and then you and your support group that's the most important. And so, yeah, that's my personal opinion. I don't like that. It feels very performative, and it to me, it cheapens everybody's experience. And instead, I'd say go talk to your therapist on your own, do your own work, and then you can come back out and do your song and dance and be the influencer that you need to be to make your money to pay your house note, right? So,
yeah. Well, cool. And I know, so when it comes to social media questions, so much of it is still so new, these content creators as careers, influencers as a career. And so, yeah, I definitely was looking for, what is your personal hot take on it? Because I personally think there's going to be a lot that comes out in a couple of years from now that's more grounded in the studies. And right now it's more, okay, what do these experts think?
yeah. Well, one of the dangerous trends that I see, and I see this and I see mostly kids. That's my, I'd say 75% of my practice is kids. And so I always ask them when I first meet them, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or what problem do you want to solve for the world? And over the last 3 to 5 years, I'd say almost 90% are saying, oh, I want to be a YouTuber. I want to be and I'm like, y'all are kidding me. I mean, what is this? Because y'all are wonderful beings of light and energy and love. And you're gonna, what? No. Yeah, so I can go on all day about that, but to make a long story short, so either YouTube is doing something that they shouldn't be doing, or the rest of us in our fields aren't doing enough. And I think it's probably a combination of both.
Yeah. And then, so I have one more social media question, and then we'll hop over to another category. But for your personal predictions for the future, do you think that they are going to find a really, a very scientifically based decision with social media, and that they're going to be able to restrict it more to make it safer for kids growing up with it? Or do you think it's going to become even more of the Wild West?
Oh, no, I think I would say within the next 3 to 5 years, social media will absolutely change. It's very similar to what happened when we recognized that the cereal commercials on Saturday morning were contributing to childhood obesity, right? Because you would see Tricks and Lucky Charms, and they would mainly advertise on Saturday. And then we start to realize, wait a minute, that's not a good idea because, obesity is going up in children, and let's change things up. With the amount of hate and vitriol, white supremacy, with the fact that YouTube's filters, I think, are terrible because kids still find ways around them. At some point, all of these things with social media are going to come to a head, and I think it's going to come to a head very soon. And yes, I would say that's going to change. And so I think it will change for the better. I think it will also change for the better for entrepreneurs, honestly, because right now it's kind of whoever either buys the most ads or has the best Hootsuite or buffer, and you try to load up just on as many content, like you said, content creation as possible, rather than the quality and the connection. And I think that when we put a few brakes on those things, I think it'll be an even place for us, a better place for entrepreneurs to grow and to reach our audiences that we're looking for.
Thank you for that. And then the last kind of area that I want to dive into before we open it up for questions is everything that you have a hand in right now. I want to know more about what you're working on, because you are perfectly positioned. You've had this incredible career that you can not only advocate for change that you think is going to be really important in the future, but you are also working towards it as an entrepreneur. And so, yeah, let's dive into that.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, what do we even want to start with? We can go back to, guide and start there, but I know you have a whole listing. So yeah, wherever you want to start.
So let me start with I'll start with money, right? Because at the end of the day, that's how things get done in our country. And the healthcare system is really stupid in how we do our money exchange. And so right now, you pay money to a third party. That third party does its best not to give money to anybody, and the system melts down. And so my first thing that I was working on was, let's create a direct pay system where you pay your clinician directly, right? So that's where the whole idea of Change Health Today came in. It's this radical new idea. There's a video on some website that I own somewhere, but essentially it creates a way for money to flow directly from you to your physician or nurse or whoever, rather than through these pipelines. Now, once you have your own money, then the next step is you pay your therapist directly. So everybody should have a team, a health team. So you should have a therapist, a massage therapist, a personal trainer. You need a physician, PT. You need a business coach if you're an entrepreneur. And you just pay those people directly. There's no reason to have insurance if you need a service. You just go and pay them directly. So once we create the mechanism to pay people directly, then we inspired the next generation of therapists and psychiatrists. And so that's where my private practice comes in. So I've built a model that I think works really, really well. It's a direct pay model, and I want to duplicate that model. And so Mindful is the name of the private practice, and our goal is to expand that statewide. The problem with running a practice is I hate running my practice. I'm a visionary. I'm not an integrator. I don't like details. I don't like policies and procedures. It's horrible. And so where Rustin comes in, we created Simply Psych as that arm. So they get to be, it's almost like a medical services arm, but it's mainly the administration piece to complement the private practice piece. And so that's where that comes in. And then at some point, people need to be able to find us. And so that's where Guide comes in. So Guide is basically a therapist to therapist referral database. It's software as a service. You log in, you will be able to find therapists. You'll be able to push that information to interested people. So if someone asks you, I need a therapist in New Jersey who works with CBT, I can just go in the app and I can push that information to you so that then you have it at point of service. And so that's how these four things stack on top of each other. But it all starts with, we need a better system to move the money, because as long as we're going through Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna, Cigna, and all the rest of them, they're going to hang on to the money, and it skews the system. And so, so that's kind of how those things work together.
Awesome. Incredible. And then looking at your next, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, those are things you're doing right now. Is there anything else you're really excited about potentially entering in the market to drastically change what it looks like right now?
Yeah. So, Devin, you're asking all the right questions. I'm like, how did you know this? So, yeah. So, I guess my BHAG, and I don't know how many years it's going to take, but when you look at different cities, they have their thing, right? So, you look at Nashville, you look at Austin, you look at San Francisco, Chicago, so on and so forth. And so, Fort Worth is awesome. Cowtown is great. But I really want this to be a mental health hub where people come to get treatment, people come to train, people come to become entrepreneurs in mental health. Because nobody in the mental health world, entrepreneurship is very, again, it's spotty and haphazard. It's not coordinated. And I want people to fly here for the conferences. I want the TED Talks to happen here. I want people to come here if they have treatment resistant depression. I want people to come here and do yoga. We want businesses. We want so I'm working on building a building that is mental health focused. I have lots of dreams, but the goal is to house that here in Fort Worth so that we become the mental health hub of the country. And I know we're going to pull it off because I'm going to make it happen.
Well, cool. Well, thank you. I feel very excited to be living in Fort Worth and
Good. You should. It's a great city. I love this place. Yeah.
I love it. Well, cool. Well, everybody, I just opened up the chat room, so feel free. Let's dive into your Q&A. I mean, you've heard all of my questions today. I have even more, but I definitely want to share Dr. Dixon's time with all of you. So, Dr. Dixon, thank you so much for answering all of those. I'm really glad to get your insight on it because we've had a lot of time to look at some of those questions, and really to get you in here to answer them was very nice, very exciting. Awesome. Awesome. We just got one in. So yes, continue sending them in the chat room and I will ask them out loud. If you don't have access to the chat, feel free to use the little emoji in the corner, the reactions. You can raise your hand, let me know, but we'll get those answered. So the first question that came up was, how do most people access mental health insurance? Is it private pay, public pay, insurance?
Yeah, so one of the difficulties with insurances, and this goes both governmental and private, is that they do not pay for what most people do. Or if they do, what most therapists do. If they do, they underpay. So for example, some therapists who are on certain panels, insurance panels, they may only get $30 to $50 for that visit. And the result is the therapist has to start to see you either more often or try to cut down on the time to squeeze more people in. And so if you have an insurance, you can always go through them to find a therapist, but it's not a guarantee. Quite a few insurance carriers don't keep their lists up to date. Like literally, I was talking with another psychiatrist recently, and she said, yeah, there was a person who was deceased, still listed on the panel like 3 to 4 years after that person had passed away. So so that's where it's tough. So direct pay is going to be your easiest option. Everybody would do it. So as long as you call the therapist and you say, hey, I'm a direct pay person, I don't want to use insurance, they will find a way to get you in. There are sometimes some hiccups with that because there are rules about if you take a certain insurance, you can't also charge cash prices, which is this weird bastardization of the system. So you have to be careful with that, but your therapist should be able to walk you through that.
Let's see, next question. Can therapy be short-term to address specific circumstances, or should it be viewed as preventative medicine?
Absolutely.
Great question.
Yeah, so great, super great question. So there are over 100 different modalities of therapy. And the traditional popular culture therapy is where you sit on the couch and you kind of ramble things off and the person sits behind you with the notepad and writing. And that is very rare. That's called psychoanalysis, and very few people do that. Most therapy is short-term. And when I say short-term, sometimes 6 months to a year, sometimes 6 to 12 visits, depending on the type of therapy you're doing. With me as a psychiatrist, so I infuse therapy into what I do with medications. And so most times I can get you feeling better within 3 to 4 months. and then I can push your appointments out and we can kind of just touch base ever so often. It just kind of depends on the whatever the issue is that you're going through. It depends on the type of therapy that person does. And when I say Fort Worth has some badass therapists, y'all, like we have some superstars that do all sorts of stuff: hypnosis, biofeedback, solution focus, EMDR. All of those folks are wonderful, and they will help you feel better. So and feel better faster. So yeah, so it's not always this long slog that just goes on for years and years and years.
Awesome. And we have some really good questions coming in, so I'm very excited for your takes on these. And I know I've read about one of them, so we'll ask this one first. But you're an MD. Do you think that right now there are too many meds being prescribed in lieu of therapy? And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so YMMV, your mileage may vary. So medicines work for who they work for. Are there times that people are overprescribed medicines? Yes. One of the biggest issues is that medicines do not change behaviors. Okay, so let me say it again for emphasis. Medications do not change behaviors, because if they did, I would just put everybody on medicine and tell them what to do and how to vote and, that the whole 9 yards. And so sometimes that happens, right? We'll have kids or adults who come in and they're like, oh, I can't believe I keep doing this. And you're like, well, let's walk through the therapy side of things rather than try to change things with medicines, right? So that I think that's part of the problem. The other thing is on the patient end of things, we like easy fixes. If I can take this pill or I could do this one thing and not have to work at it, I'm going to do it. If it's free, give me 3, right? And so that is also equally dangerous. So it's on both ends. So some doctors, yes, absolutely overprescribe. And then some patients will have kind of unreasonable expectations. And so balancing and coaching and teaching both sides how to meet more in the middle is going to be really important.
And then for the next one, I think you barely just tapped on it, or potentially it was from one of the interviews that I saw of you previously. But somebody asked, we see that you are involved with the TCU, UNT, empathetic medical program. I'm curious to see and hear how mental health is being integrated into general medicine.
Yeah, so what they're doing, and this isn't because they give me money to teach their students, so I will, let me be blunt, because it's not that much money in the grand scheme of things, trust me. So, but I'm there because I believe in what they're doing. So the way that they're doing medical education is fundamentally different than how I was taught. And it will become how medical students are trained in the future. So to make a long story short, it used to be we would put them in classrooms for 2 years and beat them over the head with these random details that they had to, and give them tests that they had to pass. And then we give them a year of exposure to what medicine is, and then we tell them to choose. And that's not how they do it there. From the very first year, they're in the clinic. So they're already getting exposed to medicine and what medicine is. And then in their second year, they do a longitudinal experience where they spend 40 weeks doing what we do over the 40 weeks. And so it's fun. It's almost like an apprenticeship model. And to me, that is how medicine should be done. You should be right beside whoever the attending is and literally learning and siphoning everything you can, rather than a whole gaggle of medical students sitting in one room and they kind of just run around and then they go from rotation to rotation and they dump the information. And so, yeah, so I'm there because I believe in what they're doing.
Awesome. And for lack of scientific terms, because I have a business background, but I also have a friend that's getting, her doctor's in occupational therapy. And at her school, they're looking at creating that holistic team of, if somebody gets injured and is in rehab, they have an OT that talks to the PT, that talks to potentially an audiologist, and that's all on one team to create holistic care for their patient. Do you see a mental health counselor being added into that mix in the future?
Yeah, so one of the rate limiting steps is how we pay for things. So our system is dumb because of how we pay for things. So yes, you're right. And OT, so it chaps my ass that you have to go through certain people to get to an OT or to a PT. Like if I want to have PT, I should just be able to go to see the PT, and if they can help me, great. And if not, they can refer me to an orthopedics or whatever. So yeah, so once we fix how we pay for things, I think that those entrepreneurially, I think you're going to see people get together. You're going to see mental health counselors and therapists get with psychiatrists, get with OTs and PTs and massage therapists, and build these centers of excellence and healing and da 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 da. Right now, it's super hard to do that because if some people take insurance, some people don't. Some people are discriminated against. Like I'm telling you, I think PTs are completely discriminated against in the insurance world. Yeah, it creates hurdles and obstacles. So when we get to a true direct pay system, especially here in Fort Worth, oh, it will be an absolute game changer.
Incredible. That's incredible to just listen to and think, oh, Fort Worth could be, the leading edge for that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, a business question came in. So as a visionary, what has been your largest challenge in building your businesses?
Ooh, you don't know what you don't know, and then pride, right? So until I was probably about 3 or 4 years ago, where I'm working my ass off, seeing as many patients as I could, yet I was paying one credit card to by using another credit card, right? And that's and yeah, and I was working hard. I was like, what is it? How do I not have any money? Like we're barely making payroll. And yeah, and then I just brought in really smart people. So, hiring Rustin was one of the best things I've ever done just because he's a great guy, but also he balances me because he's an integrator, and then getting coaching, right? Because I was just doing really dumb things that I didn't know I didn't know. And so that's where I think EO has been super helpful. That's where reading different business books has been, I use Traction as my kind of my structural thing, operations guide. And so, yeah, so that was the hardest part, is recognizing that I'm really dumb in some areas. And that's not to say that that I'm a bad person. It just means I'm not good at everything. And that's a good thing. So do what you're good at, and then don't do what you're not good at. It's super, super important.
I really like that, because I think that's almost one of those assumptions is people have either one or two schools of thought. Is you have strengths and weaknesses and utilize your strengths, forget your weaknesses, hire people that have those weaknesses, or you have your strengths, work on your weaknesses. So I think those are totally two different thoughts. So that's very interesting.
Yeah. And as a physician, one of the blessings and the curses is that we are taught to lead teams. That is, we are taught that from the moment you get into medical school, you're the leader of the medical team. And we tend to then take that everywhere we go, right? So when I get into business, I go, well, I'm the leader of the business team. And then I proceed to screw things up and hire all the wrong people and take out loans. And it was a hot mess. And I went and found different people, and it's been working great ever since.
Wonderful. And I think next question was, when it comes to resources, what resources did you utilize during your business journey and your mental health journey that have really shaped the way that, your business has been on a path? I'm so sorry. My dog is over here needing attention. But yes, any books, any, videos on YouTube, any people to meet in Fort Worth?
Yeah, so the most important book that I own is Traction by Gino Wickman. That's kind of how I run my businesses and run my life. And I'm big on compartmentalization, which can be a bad thing, but to me, it just makes sense. And so I highly recommend, if I'm ever coaching or giving advice for business, I always start with that book. There's another book called The Little Red Book of Selling by Jeffrey Gitomer, I think Gitomer. And I love what he had to say about how to make sales, because ultimately, even though I'm a physician, I am a salesperson for health, or a psychiatrist. I'm a salesperson for mental health. And really embracing that role. I have to give mad props to EO, Entrepreneurs Organization. That has been money well spent, because you don't feel so alone. So one of the difficulties in being an entrepreneur, especially as a psychiatrist, is that most psychiatrists are employed. And so they don't know what you're going through. And then most entrepreneurs aren't psychiatrists, right? So they don't know what you're going through. But being an EO, it's almost like therapy. It's like business therapy in a sense. And so that's been super helpful as well. And then, yeah, just surround yourself with really good people. I don't know how I found Rustin. I don't know how I found Matt. So Matt is he's my co-founder of Guide. I don't know how these people come into my life other than you just show up and keep talking to people and meet folks. So that's been the other thing, just show up.
I love that. Well, wonderful. We have just 2 more minutes before we close up for the day. So if you have any last minute questions, go ahead and throw it in the chat. But also I'll try to find Dr. Dixon's website link so we can throw that in the chat room as well. So if anybody wants to take advantage of that, he has so much listed on his website. It's really incredible. Let's see. Oh, okay. One last question. Any favorite psychology books? Yeah. If people are really interested in the way people work.
Yeah, so this isn't a psychology book per se, but there's two books that I just like to read. So The Chocolate Touch, which is a kid's book that we all read when we were like in 3rd grade. I love that book because it teaches you that sometimes too much of a good thing is a bad thing, right? So there's a psychology in that. And then I'm a big fan of Eckhart Tolle, the philosopher, New Agey guy. The particular book I love is The New Earth, or A New Earth is the one that I like a lot. And so as far as other psychology books, I don't really read them, honestly, because I like to have a broad knowledge of all the different psychological strategies.
Hey, Brian, quick question.
Sure.
Last night I finished judging a youth entrepreneur question, and this morning I wake up and Cook Children's is reporting more suicides the first quarter of this year than ever. Is there a constructive correlation between developing youth entrepreneurs and maybe their mental health?
So I would say yes. So most times when people have suicidal thoughts is because they have concluded that there are no other options. And if there's one thing that entrepreneurs do, is we think of more options. And so I think it is a skill in an area that we could totally again, operationalize. When you give people the means of their own livelihood and their own control, I think it can be a protective mechanism. I don't know that there's any research that says that, but that's my feeling. And so, yeah, so teaching kids, teaching people how to own their livelihood, and how to grow, how to build, I think is really, really important.
Wonderful. And then final question for today is, I think, let's see which one is it. Oh, for the kid that wants to be a YouTuber, for an influencer, for social media star, how do you bring them to reality? What is any advice we can give them? Because, we're growing them up right now.
Yeah, so the key is do not tell them that they can't do it. Instead, so one of my favorite sayings is don't stand in front of the train because it'll just run you over. Instead, you lay the tracks so that you can direct the train where it needs to go. So yeah, when they say, oh, I want to be a YouTuber, I never say, oh my God, that's a horrible idea. You're never going to make it, 1 in 3 million. I don't do that. Instead, I go, that's awesome. How are you going to do it? Well, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. I'm like, okay, well, it starts with making your bed. Are you making your bed? Well, no. Okay. Are you taking out the trash? Well, no. Okay. Well, yeah, you're going to let's work on that together. Right. So, and then I walk with them, and then eventually they go, yeah, I'll just go get a regular job like everybody else.
Awesome. Well, cool. Well, let's see. Any final thoughts from you, Dr. Dixon, before I close out this evening?
Yeah, the main thing is, y'all are, you're wonderful. We have limitless potential, even in a pandemic. So this is a disaster. The social unrest is a disaster. Racism is a disaster. Wealth inequality, a disaster. So let's find ways as entrepreneurs to inspire and to support and to build. And I'm really excited to be part of y'all's group. So thanks so much.
Awesome. Dr. Dixon, thank you so much for being here today and for answering all of our questions and, getting all of these discussion points out on the table. So thank you. Thank you.